Alright guys, I am here with Musty, the Midnight Rider chopper, ironhead chopper that I built. We're going to do part 3 of my wiring instruction diagram videos of how I wired this bike with a simple chopper wiring diagram that I designed myself and installed myself. And so let's get into it. In this video, we're going to cover kind of the last aspect, which is an overall view of how all the components fit together, what powers what goes where, and why it works. If you haven't seen the first 2 videos, go back to the YouTube channel, check those out. I give an overview of the diagram, how I drew it up, keys and tips and tricks on what wire to use, how to run them, how to pull them, and some extra tools that you may or may not want to have around your garage. Check those 2 videos out, and then, like I said, let's get into it here and show you actually how all this fits and works together. Alright, so like I said, I'm going to walk you through step by step of every component, every piece, how it all, what powers what, why it works, what you should look out for, so that you can wire your own chopper. Let's get to this. Any bike, power-wise, you're always going to start at the beginning, and that is the battery. So batteries come in all shapes and sizes, all forms and types. Again, as a recap, this is a 1971 Harley-Davidson Sportster 900. This bike is electric start. It did have a kickstart, but the previous owner abandoned it and welded up the hole. So this is electric start only. This is a 12-volt system. And so this is pretty much your run-of-the-mill standard everyday motorcycle battery. Nothing special to it there. If you have a kick-only bike or kick and you want to get rid of your electric starter, there's other tricks you can do to go to a teeny tiny battery, or maybe even a battery eliminator kit, to go to a capacitor for your power. That's a totally different kind of thing. If you have that or want that, you need to look it up on your own. This is a basic battery. For this one, walk you around this side. Every battery needs a ground. So on this battery, you can see right there, negative means ground. This is your grounding cable. I like it on this side because it's easy access. When I was wiring this bike up and doing all the work and fabrication, I had this thing on and off so many times. I actually zip tied the 10 mil wrench right to the frame so I could easily get to it and not lose my 10 mil wrench to get that nut off. I like easy access to the negative side. If I have to in a pinch, if something goes haywire in this, man, I can grab that 10, rip this guy off. I could even grab a pair of bolt cutters and just snip this wire if I needed to, if something was shorting out crazy or if my circuit breakers didn't work. So negative here, this feeds down through. You can kind of see it right there, and it actually goes through the motor mount. Comes around through the motor mount and up in right to there. If you can kind of see it. Now, if you're familiar, these Sportsters, on the top of the transmission part of the case, there are 2 bolt holes. Now, those bolt holes were previously where the oil tank mount bracket bolted to the frame. I'm sorry, bolted to the engine. With these, chopper, it's a separate oil tank, it's a totally different system, hardtail, who knows what's going on back here. Most likely, if you're watching this video and building a chopper, you are not using those 2 holes. So they're open, but they make a great grounding point. Make sure you block them off, though. These iron heads, especially this year, those holes actually go all the way down into the transmission. So if you take out those bolts and shine a flashlight in, you can see transmission gears. So point is, you want them blocked up with something. It's just convenient that one of them can be used as a grounding point. The ground on the battery needs to basically give an opportunity where anything bolted to the bike can get current flow back to the negative terminal on the battery. So the key there is you want your frame grounded and also your engine grounded. Your case, your motor has to be grounded, because for spark plugs to work, it's got to be grounded. So for this bike, what that means is I'm running the ground for the battery straight to the case. In that case, you need to be very sure that your engine mounts that go from the case to the frame make good contact. This frame was powder coated. That's a thick application. And so for this, I had to grind off some of the powder coat on the engine mounts, for one, to get it to fit, but for two, to get a decent current flow between the two. Because you'll see in a little bit, there's things like the headlight circuits and some other things that are actually grounded to the frame, and this frame needs to lead back to negative. So that's a key to remember, and if you don't have a good ground, your electrical system isn't going to work. So that's the negative side of the battery. Let's get to the positive. Let's be positive, people. Let's get to the positive. So on these chopper systems, you can kind of see them right there. There's one thicker wire. That's that 6-gauge wire I was talking to you about. That's the starting circuit. And there's a smaller guy. Now that smaller guy is interesting. We'll get to him in just a moment. Let's focus on the big one. So the big one is power. That's big dog power coming from the battery. And in mine, again, I had it loop around the other side of the frame and dip down under and go through the engine mount. That's actually this hole right here is where the kickstart shaft would have gone. So if you have a kicker bike, you're not going to be able to use this routing. For me, it worked because these cables came on the bike. I kind of wanted to reuse them rather than having to buy new. And if I routed them this way and took a little bit longer to get from point A to point B, it kept them out of the way of the chain slap and all this other stuff going on. And plus I knew I wanted my oil lines routed over here too. So all good stuff. But point is, that big battery cable comes through, up and around and right into this guy. This is your starter solenoid. This is the big dog switch that makes everything happen. So this big fat black power wire here is hot right now. If I put a lead on it and a lead on ground, it would light up or fry me. So that's hot going into the solenoid. The other side of the solenoid is another big dog black 6-gauge wire that comes out of the starter solenoid and into the starter motor. This is not hot. If this was hot, this sucker spins. What this guy does is he acts as a switch, and so when you turn the key or push the button, whatever your case is, it's going to fire this and close the circuit and push that hot power from the battery straight through it to the motor. That's what spins this electric motor that turns over your transmission, your clutch, and actually turns over the motor and starts the engine. So what controls that? What starts that? Well, if we go back to our handy dandy wiring diagram, you can see, zoom in on it and focus, that small wire that I was talking about that comes off the battery is going to come up. It's the second from the right. It's going to come in to that circuit breaker. So that's the first stop on the road. So now that we got the big wiring out of the way, let's consider the small wiring. So again, we have a smaller wire that comes out of the battery. For all intents and purposes, this wire right here, that guy controls almost everything else on the bike. All of it comes from that. And so you probably want that to be a little bit thicker than 12 gauge. I honestly don't know. Oh no, yeah, that is 12 gauge too. I'm sorry, because I ran that one brand new as well. So that's a heavier wire than just plain old 16. So you got 12 gauge coming up. He goes into the frame just like the diagram says. Sorry if I'm making you guys seasick. And runs into a circuit breaker. That's really key. Your 30 amp circuit breaker is going to be super key. You want that because if all the crap hits the fan, this guy's going to trip. This circuit breaker is not just a fuse, it's actually one of those box-shaped circuit breakers with 2 poles on it, and that guy's going to trip. It has the ability to reset. That's kind of what's nice about it. If something shorts out big time in your system, this guy will trip, and that's the first place you look to see what the problem is. If you notice, that power coming in from the battery hits the one side of the pole. And on these circuit breakers, it doesn't matter which way it goes. Current will flow either way. So if you're like, oh man, which side is which? I have one that has a copper lead and a silver lead. It doesn't matter. They flow both ways. So to one of them, though, it's important that from battery to the one side, to that same side is also another wire. You see that? So if you trace that second one, it comes, it's the second from the left, second from the left, second from the left. Where does that go? All the way to your generator and regulator. So you see, as the engine's producing current, it's producing current that's backflowing. And I know I'm probably using electrical engineering terms all wrong here, but I think of this like plumbing in a certain way. Power's coming from the battery, it's flowing in this pipe to the circuit breaker. But you also have power being generated by the engine that's flowing juice back into this same connection, which feeds juice back into the battery. So that's your charging circuit right there. That's all it is. Now I know I have another wire coming up here from the generator, but that's just a warning light. Forget that for a moment. Power generation comes from your regulator all the way back to your circuit breaker, but that same terminal touches your battery. You could effectively say that you run this lead from your regulator straight back to your positive post in your battery, and a lot of people do it that way. But to me, that's another wire that's tucked in here with your battery. I didn't prefer that. I wanted it to be hidden. I didn't want 7 wires coming off my positive terminal. So juice from battery up to circuit breaker, charging circuit in, which recharges to that same lobe of the circuit breaker. That's your charging circuit. And just like I said, man, all the juice from the bike comes from this power on the terminal here. Now that you're past the charging circuit, all the juice from the bike comes from the other side of that circuit breaker. Where does it go? That's the big question, right? All right, so I went ahead and unscrewed this plate that I made for my electrical housing box, so you can see the spaghetti mess that resides within. So this is kind of the main brain terminal, and I know it's really messy. I'm not going to pull those wires out so you can see them, but there's a couple reasons why this is messy on purpose, and I want to be clear about some of this. First off, I should have made this box bigger. That's kind of my fault. It's just barely big enough for this. Now granted, when I made this box, the key switch on the other side had one less lug. This newer key switch that I bought actually has an additional ground ground wire coming off of it just for added protection, which I had to kind of mock into this right here. You see, this is the ground coming off of that key switch, but I had to grind away some of the powder coat to get a good ground here, because then it goes to the frame and grounds back to the battery, remember? So this is all a spaghetti mess. Yes, I should have made it bigger, but it's okay that it's spaghetti mess. Here's why. If I do ever need to work on this, I can actually pull these wires out, and all of the connections that I made, I can actually pull out to where they're out here on the bike and actually work with the connections and redo them. I'd much rather have more wire than I need and work on getting it in here safely. You don't want any kinks in there or rubbing or any kind of vibrations or chafing. But it's okay to have all these bends. It's totally fine. Rather have that and be able to pull it out and work on it than try and do all this kind of work and soldering or connections and heat gun and tape, all this in there. My goodness, I would have nightmares for months if I had to do all this work inside that box. Granted, some guys love to do fuse blocks, and I'm totally cool with that. I didn't use that here, and reason being, again, going back to my diagram, I only needed, once I got past the circuit breaker, I only needed 2 fuses. And they're super minor. I mean, I put a 20 amp and a 15 amp, but I actually ran the calc on the loads. I could have done, I think it was like a 12.3 amp for the one, and like a, what was it, like a 5.2 amp for the other one. So I could have done smaller, and being that they're just basic bayonet style fuses pushed in there, I could always lower the fuses too. I honestly think I have, I think I ended up putting two 15s in there just so I wasn't too high above the threshold there for the fuses. But point is, for me, these little inline fuses worked completely fine for what I needed, because again, I was coming from the terminals on the key switch into the fuses and out to stuff. So let's take a look at how I did that. Again, we talked about the charging circuit, we talked about the power circuit for the starting. We're now beyond the circuit breaker, which on mine you can kind of see up in there. You see it with the 2 lobes right in there. Let me see if I can focus on it. One of those is power hot coming in, and also the power cable coming from the generator for the recharge. The other side simply goes from the circuit breaker into the battery, the B terminal on your key switch. That provides juice to the key switch. Now, what's interesting is that's always hot. You see that? You got always hot power coming from the battery, coming up to always hot power at the circuit breaker. but then it goes always hot power to the battery. So that key is always hot, and that's a good thing. You want it that way. So again, as you're doing all of this, it's good to know what's hot, what's not, and when it should and shouldn't be, because you need a test light. You need a little tester light. I could grab one, but you guys know what a tester light looks like. Some of them have alligator clips on both ends of a wire with just a light in the middle. Some of them look like a pen. That's what mine looks like. It looks like a pen with a really sharp, pointy bit on it. And then the other end is an alligator clip. You need to be testing every connection, every point along the way. Before you get started, make sure that that hot cable coming from your battery is actually hot. Ground it out to something. Test it with a test light. When you hook it into your key switch and you get there, before you start running other stuff and hooking into your switch, leave the hot coming in on battery, put your key in the thing, turn the sucker on, and see if power comes to your accessory. If it lights up, great, then you know your key switch is working. If it doesn't, then either your key switch is bad, or your ground is bad, or your battery's not getting hot juice all the way in. So checking it every step along the way is going to make those last few minutes before you fire the bike up for the first time a lot less stressful. So coming in here, let's check this out. So we got always hot power coming in from the battery. With this key switch, if you turn it one direction, it comes to accessory, just like in a car. In a car, you turn it back towards you, it goes to accessory. Same thing on this type of key switch that I got from TC Bros. For that, I come out of there with one wire into one of those inline fuses, those bayonet style fuse holders. From that one fuse, I ran two wires. One of those wires, you can see, comes up second from the left and comes back, and that's your rear brake. We'll talk about that in a sec. Your other one, from that single fuse, comes up, 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 up. And I'll give you a hint. It comes up here and ends up powering a lot of this stuff in here, including the headlight. So we'll get to that too. Key is accessory turns on, gives juice to all of your warning lights, your high beam switch, your headlight, and your taillight. You turn the key switch the opposite direction, and it goes to ignition, and actually gives power to both accessory and ignition. Oh, I'm sorry, on. I said that backwards. You turn it the opposite direction, it goes to on. For on, it gives power up through this 15 amp circuit, comes up, and you see that's that first line, into the coil. So key goes in, turn it to accessory first, that powers up your lighting circuits and your warning lights. You turn it to on, and that gives power to your coil. When you go to the fourth position, that's the spring-loaded one, like a car. Vroom, vroom. When you go to that spring-loaded position, let's check out real quick where it actually sends power. Let me see if I can trace it with this. So it's going to start with ignition. This is your spring-loaded. This is your starting. It's going to then take power from battery and send juice to your starter solenoid. That's all it does. It's just saying, hey, all right, I'm going to send power to the starter solenoid. And guess what the starter solenoid does at that moment when the key goes to the spring-loaded position? It's sending power to the solenoid, which tells the solenoid to connect these two from battery to starter. So all of a sudden, when you go key into the spring position, guess what? This guy starts spinning. The solenoid throws a gear so it actually engages in your clutch, and life is good. As soon as the engine starts running, you're obviously going to let off the key, unless you are on a YouTube video of motorcycle fails. You're going to let off the key, and at that point, both the on and accessory circuits have constant power that's coming from the battery, but also from the generator charging circuit, right? So that's going to keep juice going to your tail light, to your headlight, to your warning lights, and also to your coil. Now the fun part is, I haven't said much about the points yet, have I? Well, that's because the points don't really operate the kind of way you'd think in terms of standard circuiting. And I'd have to get into how the actual engine works with how a coil works to store up charge, how points work to open and close. But let's consider it this way. So for the on, we're going to first send power up that bottom line, up the far left line, into 17, into your coil. So when the key is on, this has power. Juice is coming in here. You see that other line, that other lead from the other side of the coil comes up and ends up being the top line up here, which becomes the left line down here, which becomes the bottom line and goes to the points. And so basically the way it works, juice naturally wants to flow through here and through your points. And the points basically is a closed alligator clip, for lack of a better way to describe it. Ooh, got some old school 80s hairband metal driving by. So the points are closed and the current flows this way. Power goes from the battery up to the coil, down to the points, and grounds itself out to the engine, right? Well, when the engine spins, there's a little cam in here that opens the points every time it wants the spark plugs to fire. When it opens the points, now that current has nowhere to go. But rather than just kind of vaporizing, what it does is stores up inside the coil to a point where it releases a big charge. All of a sudden, pop. That pop sends current in the net. Basically, since it can't ground itself out through the points, it tries to ground itself out somewhere else, and that somewhere else is through the spark plugs and the cylinder heads themselves. If you've ever tested spark plugs, and what do? You take the spark plug out, you leave it plugged onto the wire, right? But if you try and crank over a motor just holding the spark plug out here in thin air, it's never going to spark because it can't ground itself out. What do? You have to touch it to something metal. You have to touch it to a ground on the bike, then see if it actually sparks. Same thing is happening when it's down in the cylinder head. So the coil is kind of controlling that. Go back to our diagram. What does all that mean? Basically, power to key goes power to coil, power down to points or Dyna-S ignition or electronic ignition, whatever you have. Life is good, but that's not going to cause the spark plugs to spark. When the engine rotates at a point where it tells the rest of the system when to have the spark plugs ignite, it opens or it triggers or it hits the dial on the electronic ignition and tells a signal to ground out somewhere else, and it grounds itself out somewhere else in the spark plugs. So for your ignition system, it's actually really simple. Regardless of what type of ignition you have, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be one wire that comes up to your coil, wherever you have your coil mounted. Maybe it's back here on the frame, maybe it's somewhere else. So one power hot in and one power hot out to ground. With the coil, you're going to want to be careful how you test that with test lights. Just be sensitive, because there's a couple ways that you can fry a coil. With most of the coil, coils come in all different shapes and sizes too. Some are dual fire, some are single fire. I won't get into that. Look it up. 9 times out of 10, if you just buy a coil that's designed for your bike, you'll be fine. But maybe I'll do a separate video on coils and types and styles. The one thing I will say, with a points ignition, you need a 5 ohm resistance coil. With a Dyna-S ignition, I'm not sure. I just don't know. I think you still need a 5 ohm coil, because I think a Dyna-S ignition is still considered a mechanical ignition, and it still uses the same kind of deal. But with a full, true, computerized, digital, electronic ignition, you go down to a 3 ohm coil. That's just, keep that in mind as you go about life. What else? Yeah, let's say this too. Going back to the points. So I have points on this bike, which means I have a 5 ohm coil, which means the spark plug wires want to be true copper, not the carbon impregnated newer spark plug wires. So if you're buying a new setup, if you're getting new spark plugs and you say, oh man, I want cloth white wires or something like that, just be smart about it. Do your research and homework before you go buying something, because you might buy the wrong spark plug wires. When I bought this bike, it had points, but a 3 ohm coil, the wrong wires, and some really weird spark plug temperature and gap to make it run, and it ran like poop. I don't even know how a thing was running. I replaced all of that, and the thing runs like a dream. So keep that in mind when you're doing all your research on spark plugs. So then back to the diagram. I want to wrap this video up here. Let's talk real quick about the lighting circuits. So on this one, I did it kind of interesting. Let me pop over to the other side of the bike here. Get my handy dandy milk crate frowny face. See, he always looks like he's sad. Oh, but we built a chopper, dude. So the way I did this one, I mentioned it in previous videos. These are my two warning lights. This is generator light. If the generator is not charging, this light will light up. This is my oil pump. If oil pump is not pumping, this light will light up. I did them that way because I figure this light's toward the rear, which is where the oil pump is, and this light's toward the front where the generator, I don't know, whatever. Then also high beam switch. Just a 2-position toggle with a little blue light on the top. So the way that works, let's check out how the power feeds. Again, thinking from point A to point B. I got power coming up from accessory. That's the second from the top line. It comes in, and first power hits number 24, which is my oil pump light, right? Then power jumps over to 26, which is my generator light. Then power jumps to number 6, which is my high beam, and then power goes out of the high beam as the top one, which comes up to the headlight, and that's your low beam constant hot power. You follow that? So basically it's like hopscotch connect the dots. I have a hot line coming in whenever the key is turned on or to accessory. Hot line coming in, and it hits hot power, hot power, hot power, hot power, low beam. So then beyond that, what do we got? The way these warning lights work, and by the way, these are just these are reverse lights off of an ATV, believe it or not. And I just scratched, they came with a little R on the light. I just scratched that off the jewel. They're super cheap, like $5 reverse lights that I just drilled a hole and mounted them in there. So they work, they have 2 wires, one hot, one ground, right? So the way these work for both the generator and the oil pump pressure switch. Let's take the oil pump pressure switch for the first one. We have hot power coming in. So all we need for that light to light up is a ground, right? If you ground it out, that light's going to light up. So you follow this wire, and it comes around, and it just hooks into the oil pressure switch. What does that tell us? Basically this. When the bike is running and life is good and oil is pumping through the machine, this switch will not ground out. Therefore, the light will stay off. If something goes bad and oil stops pumping, this switch closes and makes contact and grounds itself out through the case and through the frame, back to the negative terminal on the battery, right? As soon as this little warning light has a ground, then that light's going to light up. That's all it is. That's all there is to it. Same goes with the generator. You got hot power in and a ground coming out. All you need is, if it grounds out, the light will light up. When you hook it to this post of the regulator that's attached to the generator, again, that guy is right up there. You can see the 2 wires in the front of it. One of those is actually the wire that sends current back to the battery, and the other one is for the warning light. And I think the actually has a B and an L next to those terminals on the regulator, so it makes it super easy. But you got the ground wire coming out of that warning light down and hooks into the regulator. If everything's working fine and this generator is actually producing current going back to the battery to recharge it, then there's no ground. It won't ground and that light won't go on. If there's no current coming back, then this little guy here grounds out, and then that light's going to light up. That's all there is to it. So then beyond that, to the high beam switch. These switches come in a million different ways, so I won't get too far into it. But basically you have a hot coming in and a hot out. That's your low beam. The middle line there is your high beam switch. So when I flip the switch, focus. When I flip the switch, that hot in, hot out is still hot, because these headlights function where both are hot to get both filaments lit up inside the bulb. So yours might be different. So when you buy a headlight, make sure you understand the wiring diagram of it, so you can buy a switch that makes sense with the type of wiring that's going to go to your headlight. For this one, it's hot in, hot out for low, a middle lug on the switch, which goes to the high beam, and then actually a ground. I said in one of the previous videos that this was a 4-prong switch. I was wrong. It's only a 3. So I only have 9 wires in here. No wonder why it was so easy. So yeah, low beam, hot in, hot out. High beam is just another wire coming out that goes straight to the headlight. And then this switch needs a grounding spot, so I grounded that out. Go up to the headlight, pretty simple. Constant hot for low. Unique hot, I guess you'd say, for your high beam, and then just a grounding light. That's pretty much it, guys. Oh, back to taillight. How could I forget the taillight? Okay, so on this taillight, you'll have to check, depending on what type of taillight switch you get, what the wiring configuration is, but I can tell you for this pull type, it's pretty simple. So with this guy, the way it works, again, when we have the key on accessory or on, it sends constant hot back as the bottom line into one of the lugs. And then you'll see I have another wire, constant hot, coming out of it. So just like the headlight switch, constant hot in, constant hot out, and that constant hot comes up and powers the tail light. Then on the other side of the switch is hot when the switch is activated. So constant hot stays constant hot, but then you got this additional hot that comes up as a second hot line for when you step on the rear brake. That's all there is to this switch. This type of switch does not need a ground. It's not required. Shoot, they come in a plastic housing, for goodness sakes. So they're super cheap and super basic. I don't like the looks of them. So as far as chopper design, meh, but they work for now. And I didn't have to drill the frame, so that's kind of nice that I can just remove all this junk and be fine later on. So for this taillight, this is just a kitschy little cat face taillight. They sell them in a ton of different sizes and shapes. This is a run-of-the-mill marker light taillight design where you have 2 wires coming in for your, we'll call it low beam, high beam, running light, brake light. But then the bulb itself grounds itself out through the housing and the case to the bulb fitment there. Key to that, why that's important, is you need to make sure you have a good ground to this mount. This sissy bar is on an angle, and I wanted the light to be kind of tilted, and so it was last minute. I had to kind of finagle together some standoff couplings with ground off faces and some weird pins on the inside to get this thing rigid in there, but on an angle, and stood off this because I was running out of room between the back of the seat in here and the housing to get all that stuff in there. Point is, when I did all of that, I had to make sure that no matter what, in here I had a good constant contact from the housing to the bolts to the steel sissy bar, chrome, and the sissy bar down to the frame, and the frame to what? You guessed it, negative terminal on the battery. Has to be ground. If I had some sort of rubber bushing spacers in here where this wasn't making good contact, then my sissy bar would not be ground, and then this taillight would not work. So you got to keep those things in mind. That's why it's so important to have a test light, and every time you make a connection, every time you make a plan for how you're going to run stuff and do stuff and connect it, test it. Test light, test light, test light. Check your diagram, plan, and wire your chopper. So yeah, that's the rear brake. It's super simple, pretty straightforward. I mean, there's techniques that you can use. I mean, if you look, I ran some wiring in there. Let's see if I can see. Oh yeah, you can see it. See that? Before I went to powder coat, I had my welder buddy weld some tabs on the inside of the fender there. And then I was able to take the wiring loom, those 2 wires, see if I can focus on it. It's kind of getting dark. Tucked up underneath there. So then with that, I was able to come all the way under the fender here, tucked up so the tire is never going to rub it. There's like 10 of those things, so they're like every so often apart. Wire comes out again in shrink tube up behind, in between the sissy bar and the back seat, and then out that little gap right there into the light. So there's tricks you can do like that with if you're not running wiring in frame tube. Just be aware and be looking for those opportunities to kind of tuck stuff away and make it more hidden. Less wires you see, the better. There are 2 wires on this bike that I messed up, and I didn't put shrink tube on them, and they're exposed. I mean, obviously not that. That's just because the cover's off. And I hate it. I hate that I missed those 2 wires, but at the same time, they're in a spot that would be really hard to undo and correct without getting the bike kind of up on a lift and getting underneath it. So I won't tell you where those wires are. I'll just say that I hate them. Maybe I'll do it better on the next chopper. We'll see. Alright guys, so what'd you think? I wanted to run through all the details. I know this video here, number 3, was kind of long, so thank you for sticking in there with me and following along. If you've watched all 3 videos, man, big thumbs up to you. You really need to find something to do. Go wire your bike now. Don't be sitting here watching half-hour stinking YouTube videos, for goodness sakes. No, thanks for watching. I hope this made sense. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully maybe you thought of something that you wouldn't have thought of before. Now you're willing to try something you wouldn't have tried on your own. It's really straightforward. Don't be intimidated by wiring diagrams. I see a lot of people online on threads. They're saying, you know, wiring is the most stressful part of a bike build. I disagree. I think wiring was actually one of the most satisfying and peaceful parts of a bike build for me, to plan it out. And maybe that's why. Maybe it's because I had so much planning put into it and so much thought. I wired this bike in my head a lot, many times, before I actually even cut the first wire or drilled the first hole. So just make a plan and stick to it. That's really all I can say. And be careful what you read online. I offer up what I did, not as the only way to do it. There are a million ways to wire a bike, and everybody's got their own opinion on what gauge wire to use and what to do and what not to do. I show you what I did because it works. The bike runs. You've seen other videos of me riding it. It works. And for a chopper wiring diagram on an old iron head Sportster, proof is in the pudding. Runs good, guys. So if you have any questions, like I said before, drop them in the comments down below. I always read the comments. I respond to almost all of them. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this kind of video, let me know. There's a lot of other things about this bike that I kind of had to learn how to do on my own. Ask a bunch of people, learn from some of the older guys who've been around the game for a while. And so a lot of information that I learned on this first build. This is kind of introductory chopper build for me. And so if there's any way that I can pass along that info to you guys, I'd love to do so. Just let me know. What do you want to see next on the chopper? You want to see some mounts or some more engraving? How I did the front end, or gas tank, or what do you want to see? Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Hope you guys have fun on your own chopper projects. See ya. Oh, and P.S. real quick. Just because I got the garage door closed and it's dark in here now. Check this out. So this is, key is in, go to on, or I'm sorry, accessory. So that's accessory, brake light's lit. And hit the rear brake. Nice and bright. And I also got the warning lights that I was talking about. This is the generator and oil pump, and then high beam. Blue light lights up. So that's what it looks like when the high beam is on. It's actually kind of cool at night. So that's that. So then that's accessory. Back to the off position, right? Key back in the slot. Turn to the right. Now that's accessory and ignition. So now power is going to the coil. And if I wanted to, I could turn over into the spring-loaded position and actually fire the bike. I'm not going to do that now because the door is closed and it's getting kind of late. So I wanted to show you that too. So that's what I was talking about with all that kind of stuff. Okay, bye. See ya.